Aloha, everyone. I'm Tom Peake on the Big Island, a longtime writer and writing teacher, and the author of the contemporary Hawaii novel, Daughters of Fire. I'm very excited about today's featured author, Marya Waifoon Schwabe, and her extraordinary new memoir, Road to Freedom, a journey from occupied Tibet, the true story of the search, discovery, and escape of a reincarnate Lama. I've known Marya for many years through mutual Big Island friends and through her important work at Wood Valley Temple in Ka'u. Marya and her husband Miguel manage and reside at the temple, which was established in 1974 by Nechung Rinpoche, an eminent Tibetan Lama. They studied, lived, and worked with him for 8 years until his passing in 1983. Marya has organized 2 programs there for the Dalai Lama and the visits for dozens of Tibetan teachers of all lineages. She is fluent in Tibetan and has translated for many of these lamas. In 1987 and 1993, following the Dalai Lama's guidance, Marya, Miguel, and a monk from Nechung Monastery in India made 3 journeys to Tibet in search of Nechung Rinpoche's reincarnation. The story of their search, discovery, and escape with their teacher's 8-year-old reincarnation is documented in her memoir. Their experience demonstrates that even in a world filled with seemingly insurmountable obstacles, amazing things can be accomplished if you have courage, wits, faith, comradeship, and occasionally a sense of humor to keep your bearings. As the Dalai Lama writes in his foreword to the book, Marya's story is, quote, an example of how setting a goal and taking a realistic and determined approach to fulfilling it eventually lead to success. Marya, welcome to the 16th annual Hawaii Book and Music Festival. Mahalo for accepting the festival's invitation. I also want to thank Roger Jelnick for all he does to keep the festival vital, exciting, and relevant. And Colin Wong, who is the tech wizard behind our screens today. Marya, this is an extraordinary book.
Well, after Rinpoche's passing, we often saw His Holiness in Dharamsala during our visits there. And each time we would ask him where Rinpoche was reborn. And he would often just say, well, just wait, be patient. And finally, in 1987, he told us that Rinpoche had been born in Tibet, in Lhasa. And so we set out on a journey, and we spent 3 months in Lhasa. But His Holiness actually warned us that we wouldn't find the boy during that visit. So we just really went in and learned the sort of made network with friends and allies, learned the area around Lhasa, went to sacred lakes, and we spent the summer there and came back, and His Holiness basically said, when the time comes, you'll receive the help. I'll let you know when the time comes. And so in 93, he told us again at that point that Rinpoche was born in Lhasa and gave us more clues as to where to look and who his parents were, the names of his parents.
And why you and Miguel? Why did he ask you and Miguel to be at the center of this search?
He didn't exactly ask us, but we were 2 of Rinpoche's closest students. Obviously there were other students that had studied with him, including a few monks at the monastery, because of the whole situation that happened in '59 and the Tibetans coming out, and they were just re-establishing themselves between '59 and '75 when Rinpoche came to Hawaii. So he had one very close student there who actually is the monk that went with us to Tibet. So after His Holiness told us that Rinpoche was indeed in Tibet, we asked him if we would be the appropriate people to go. And he said, actually, as Westerners and with an American passport. Actually, at the time I was still Canadian, but with Western, passports, you actually have more rights than our own people. And so he nodded and said, basically, he gave us the go-ahead. And also with the blessing of the senior monks at the monastery, who completely trusted us, because without their blessing, we couldn't have gone either. And
well, and these monks at the home monastery in Dharamsala, they had a long relationship with you, which kind of raises the question that maybe for our audience would be helpful. Kind of a preliminary question to the story, which is, why is there a Tibetan Buddhist temple on Hawai'i Island? And how does it fit in with the Tibetan diaspora after the Chinese takeover and occupation?
well, so the Chinese basically started their invasion of Tibet in 1949, and it reached a critical peak in 1949 and 1959 when His Holiness went into exile. So from that time on, this Tibetans were scrambling just to survive. And in the early 70s, a few lamas had come to the West and had come to America. And a few Westerners had actually made their way to India to study with swamis and to meet the Tibetans and the lamas. And two of these people, Jesse and Nancy, actually met Nechung Rinpoche and asked him to come to Hawaii to start a center, to start a Buddhist center. So that was like in 1972. And they came back, but there was no site for such a center. So they came to the Big Island and basically found this beautiful temple, which was quite, the grounds were overgrown and it was needing repair and so forth, because it had been abandoned for about 5 years after the Nichiren Buddhists had left the valley to move to Hilo and other places. And so they basically got a sublease to fix it up and start this center here in Wood Valley for Rinpoche.
So this was formerly a Japanese Buddhist temple.
It was a Nichiren, it was the first Nichiren temple mission to be built in Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, apparently the monk that came, he came in 1900 and he lived in Oahu for a couple of years, and he looked all over the islands, including Oahu, for a site. And finally he settled on Wood Valley. I guess there were certain Japanese folks that were dedicated to the Nichiren school of Buddhism around this area. So he built this temple. It's the first Nichiren temple.
So we often, on the Big Island, we often refer to it as Wood Valley Temple, but it has a Tibetan name. What is the Tibetan name and what does that name mean?
So Wood Valley Temple, actually, the Tibetan name is Nechung Dorje Drayang Ling, but most people really can't remember that. So often we'll say it's Nechung because in Tibetan, that's an easy word to remember. And most Tibetans, if you mention Nechung, they would know the monastery because it's quite a relevant and important cultural, has important cultural relevance in for the Tibetans. And so Nechung is like small place, and Dorje means immutable, and Drayang is like melodious sound, and Ling means island or center or place. It's like small center of small island, small center of melodious sound, of immutable and melodious sound.
So would you tell us a bit about your beloved teacher, Nechung Rinpoche, and how you and Miguel came to be his students?
So the temple got started in 73, and it was started for the purpose of bringing Rinpoche here, but it took him a couple of years to get here. So in the meantime, there were several other lamas that were traveling the West Coast, and they invited one of these lamas over. And at that time, Miguel and I came. And the folks that started it basically invited anybody that wanted to be involved, that wanted to work, that wanted to come around to participate. So that's what we did. So that's a picture of Rinpoche in Lhasa. It was in the 1940s. You could see his like felt Tibetan boots, and he's dressed very formally, and he was about maybe in his mid 30s at the time, early 30s, mid 30s. And he loved Wood Valley. He came finally in 1975. And during that time, we organized a visit for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. That's Rinpoche there, His Holiness seated there. Move it over, yeah. And
Yes,
there's Miguel and me in the back, and Mrs. Nakamura, Reverend Nakamura and Mrs. Nakamura, who were part of the Jodo mission in Hilo. They were such gracious. There's Reverend Nakamura. They were so helpful and so supportive for this little Tibetan temple to get started back in the 70s.
And that's you right there, yeah?
That's me.
Marvelous pictures, marvelous pictures.
That's me.
So would you tell us a bit about the Tibetan cultural tradition of reincarnated lamas and why a book about that is so timely right now?
Okay, well, as you know, Tibet has a unique tradition of searching and discovering, recognizing lamas of importance. And so, of course, like the Dalai Lama, this is the 14th reincarnation. And so there's a whole method, there's like different ways to find these lamas, to find the reincarnations. But usually the search party is only kind of limited, like confined to members of the Tibetan community and monastics, or members of the Lama's household, which Miguel and I were part of his household here in Hawaii, and since we met him. And including this monk that we went to Tibet with, he was also in Rinpoche's household, as was Debla, the monk that we lived with. Okay, so I mean, household just meaning, you know, like students and also those that just work with the Lama. And so being non-Tibetans to participate in such a search is really, as far as we know, unheard of. That we don't know of any other Westerner that has been part of such a search. And so it was really an honor that His Holiness trusted us to go, and also the senior monks trusted us to go. It's really important because I really wanted to share that story because it is so unusual. And it's important because of what's happening in Tibet still, right? I mean, after the 1959 diaspora and the Tibetans like basically spreading all over the world, they're probably in many Western countries, and there's many Dharma centers now. But the repression continues, the oppressions continues in Tibet. I mean, there's still problems with like people having pictures of the Dalai Lama, you know, they're thrown in jail. And if there's any mention of independence or any mention of human rights, it's just not acceptable. And so I wanted to also shed light on the Tibetan situation. And thirdly, it's an important subject right now because His Holiness is like 87. He's very healthy, and he has spoken publicly many times that he'll live to be over 100. And he certainly, you know, looks youthful and is in good health. But yeah, he's still 87. And so the Chinese are kind of itching to replace him. They have a fear of him in a sense because of his influence on the Tibetans, both inside and outside Tibet. And he has a great influence he has many students of many kinds, many Chinese students now abroad. And so they have actually started a committee that we heard of recently of 25 members. that are in charge of finding, not finding, but actually replacing this current Dalai Lama with somebody that they want, like they did with the Panchen Lama.
Essentially displacing the tradition of the reincarnation.
Yeah, I mean, they have no experience. They have no knowledge of reincarnation. They don't really, the Chinese Communist Party doesn't really have the philosophy behind it. And so that's in the book, actually. There at the back of it, there's an article that His Holiness wrote about 10 years ago on the meaning of reincarnation. And it's quite meaty, you know, it's quite like deep philosophically, but he does go into how this tradition kind of evolved and how it's like practice.
So the other thing that struck me when I read it is, and as someone who's lived in Hawaii for many, many years now, over 3 decades, magical things happen.
Yeah.
And Westerners don't always have a place in their, at least in their left brain, to acknowledge that. But one of the things that comes through is it's filled with those kinds of things happening that those of us who've lived in Hawaii a long time, and especially Keiki Okaina or Native Hawaiians who are from here, you know, that they know that that's part of reality. Mm-hmm. And it comes through again in a very matter-of-fact way throughout the book. But that's another one of the underlying themes that I found very interesting in the book, and that I think people in Hawaii, particularly Native Hawaiians and Keiki Okaina, are going to appreciate. They'll resonate with it. You know, it is a part of the reality that people here know. And that's part of the answer that came to my mind when Sasha asked the question. We're getting some more questions. Sasha also asked, how did they know he was the true reincarnation? If you can reveal that to us.
His Holiness had, you know, often he doesn't recognize all lamas. In fact, he's kind of narrowing it down to where he's particular about who he recognizes now. So, but because Nechung is quite connected with the succession of Dalai Lamas, it's like I said earlier, it's quite an important monastery, and it's the monastery of the state oracle. So between His Holiness's divinations, his clues, telling us the names of the parents, where he was born, the year he was born, we were able to work the system, it's in the book, to where we were able to find him. And also, like I said, the third trip was magical. Everything came together to where it was not a hardship at all. We didn't have to like look for a needle in a haystack, you know, which would have been really impossible. Also, the Nechung Oracle also recognized him. That's another story.
Excuse me. So where is the reincarnate Rinpoche now, and what is his current role?
He is one of the 2 head lamas of Nechung Monastery. And the other lama is the Nechung Guden, who is the medium of the chief state oracle. So there are several state oracles, but Nechung or Dorje Drayang Ling is the chief state oracle. So there's a medium for him, for the oracle, and then there's the reincarnate lama, which Rinpoche is. So this is at Gutu, this is in Lower Dharamsala, and this is like several years ago. There's Miguel and me and Rinpoche. We don't see.
I can get this other picture up.
Yeah, the other one is great. This is at Wood Valley Temple after one of the teachings. He is an extraordinary teacher. He goes really deep into the subject matter. There's nothing shallow about the way he teaches. And he loves to teach. So this is, I think this is 2019. And he hasn't been back since because of COVID. He was going to start coming back like every year. He basically has been at the monastery, and he just finished a 4-month retreat, and with the accompanying fire purification ritual at the end. So yeah.
So Chris Werner asked this question.
Hi, Chris.
Maybe you could say a little more about it. He's asking, or he or she, I'm not sure, when might Rinpoche visit Hawaii? And do you think he might ever take residency here?
He will probably, are hoping that he will come back next year. He does have a longer, he does have the remaining 6 or 7 years to a 10-year tourist visa. So he does have that. And we do hope to get him a longer visa to where he can get a green card and so on. I don't think that he will live here full-time because of his importance and his role at the monastery. So he does have to be there a part of the year, but we're hoping that he'll be here like 4, 5, 6 months a year. Yeah.
So Marilyn Hawaii also asks, did you ever face feeling of defeat and frustration? And if so, how did you overcome it?
You mean during the journey?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Did you ever face feelings of defeat and frustration? And if so, how did you overcome it?
We never felt defeat. We always knew that we would succeed. I mean, despite all the hardship, despite having to go through multiple checkpoints, which we actually knew there were a number of checkpoints already from our 1987 trip, because we went overland, right? So, but at that time, there were maybe only like 8 or 9 checkpoints. So it had doubled in the 6 years. The part that was somewhat frustrating, and it wasn't that we weren't able to work it out, was our traveling companion, the monk that we were with. He's very energetic, he's very charismatic, but he is
talking
also,
about Thupten here.
Yeah, Thupten.
Thupten.
He's
a great character in this story.
Is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
He is. You can see him in the pages. He can be also somewhat impulsive. And he's very politically motivated. He's quite the activist. He still is. And he doesn't, in some ways, he doesn't sort of see the ramifications of certain actions. So at certain points in the 93 trip, he kept saying, you can leave now. You can go back to Kathmandu and wait for me in the hotel. And I will bring Rinpoche out. And we're going, we're not leaving. We're not, this is too important. And besides, His Holiness and the elders trusted us to come, to go on this journey. And so, and he had already, I mentioned earlier that he had disappeared during the second journey. And that was because he had actually gotten arrested and like hooded and interrogated. So we're going, you have already been arrested. And so we're not leaving you with our precious Rinpoche. And so we kind of kept to our goal of sticking to it. And he was okay. He was so amazing, really, because it was really through his contacts. And it took 3 of us to really get this job done. But besides for that, there really weren't that many frustrations.